I mentioned last week that the idea of these briefings is to give you a deeper understanding of the military decisions that are being discussed in Jerusalem and Washington right now. With us in the studio, Mikey Kay, former senior officer in the British military. He flew assault helicopters for 20 years. He's done plenty of these briefings for senior officials. And as we did last week, we are going to run it as if it were an official briefing. Welcome.
Thank you.
We were talking last week, expecting last week, this Israeli retaliation to the Iranian missile attacks. And we talked about the potential courses of action, what you call COA. The former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has just said in the last few minutes that it will come. It will be deadly, precise and surprising. And he wants the Prime Minister to hit the nuclear facilities. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's certainly upscaling a little bit from what we spoke about last week. There are key critical targets that will be on the IDF targeting list. And we took a scan at these last week's security brief. If we can go slide. Most consequential, I think, that we spoke about are, as you just pointed out, Christian, the nuclear facilities. By no means any stretch easy targets to hit, because the most important ones that are enriching the uranium, they're mostly underground. So they're going to be even if the IDF can launch strikes and get bombs on targets, they're not necessarily guaranteed to be destroyed. Other key critical assets or targets inside that will be oil and petroleum infrastructure. That will obviously degrade Iran's oil capability. And then you've got other targets which will really come into their own over the next week or so, depending on the COA that the IDF go for, such as surface-to-air missile systems, which will be key for the IDF to take out if they were to launch a fixed-wing package.
Do the Israelis have the capability to destroy those facilities entirely? And what happens if they fall short of that?
In short answer, yes. And the reason for that is at the end of last month, the IDF actually conducted a fixed-wing strike on Yemen, which is over 1,000 miles away. And if we can go to a short video slide, please. What you can see here, Christian, is the IDF's F-35, its stealth fighter. That is more likely to be used in a package for what's called SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense, i.e. taking out the surface-to-air missile systems. It is stealth. It can get in closer. And it's stealth because it's got a reduced radar cross-section. Now, the really interesting bit, slide. The really interesting bit that comes now is this is IDF video footage of an F-16 fighter jet being refueled by an IDF KC-135 refueling tanker. That black thing you can see on the top of the screen, that's the boom that puts the fuel inside the jet, and then the jet will peel off, and then it will be able to go on to its target. If we can bring up a slide of the airborne courses of action of the potential routes in, I don't know if we've got that, but there were 4 that we looked at last week, and there we go. You can see that, from the longest range, they could actually go south of Yemen and all the way up into Iran. The good bit about that is that will require less airspace approval. The bad bit, obviously, is it's going to require more tanks. If you take the more direct route across Saudi Arabia, they are going to have to get airspace approval from the Saudis, which may or may not be complex. It is a shorter route, which gives them obviously less of an airborne time and less refueling.
But you think it will be fixed wing then? It won't be a missile attack?
I mean, in order to strike any of those targets, especially the nuclear facilities, you are going to have to put a significant bomb on the target, but it's also likely going to have what's called a penetrator. That's effectively a steel tip that goes on the end of a 2,000-pound bomb or a Delilah standoff missile, and they will have to use those, especially on the nuclear targets, in order to construct any form of damage. The good thing about the standoff missiles, which are strapped to an aircraft such as the F-15 or the F-16, is that they can stay away outside potentially of what's called the MES, the missile engagement zone of Iranian surface-to-air missile systems, and they can launch it whilst reducing effectively the threat on the fixed-wing package.
Right, okay. What are we hearing from Iran? Because obviously they're expecting this will be coming. How might they respond to that threat and the pressure that Hezbollah is already coming under in Lebanon?
Yeah, there's two trains of thought there. I think. Slide. If we go to the regional map. I mean, the distances are huge, but if Israel were to launch a fixed-wing package, then what would really come into its own from Iran's perspective are the surface-to-air missile systems. They'll be absolutely critical in taking out elements of that package, and the Israelis won't want to put the tankers too near to that zone, because obviously they're strategic assets. But I think more broadly, the most likely COA, as we used to call it in the military, the ML COA, will be a response along the lines of what we saw last week, which was just over 180 ballistic missiles that were launched from Iran, that were far more effective. Now, the IDF are saying that they intercepted most of them, but they were far more effective using the ballistic missiles than they were on the previous attack, where they had a combination of ballistic missiles, UAVs, and cruise missiles. So for me, I think the most likely course of action will be a response. That is obviously depending on whether the Iranians have the logistical resupply of all those ballistic missiles, because
it's also dependent on the Americans and the American response.
It is also dependent on the Americans, and I think this brings up a very interesting article by Axios in terms of Jake Sullivan, who basically, from an undisclosed source, basically did allude to the fact that the Americans do not want the Israelis or Netanyahu to go after the nuclear facilities, and if they did, that would certainly bring into question how and if the US would respond in the normal way. So, for example, using destroyers in the Mediterranean to help with Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 2 and 3, which is the layered defense system that the IDF have.
Which brings us then to that pretty stark statement we had last night, which we brought you on the programme from Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's play that.
You have an opportunity that hasn't existed in decades. An opportunity to take care of the future of your children and grandchildren. You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza.
I mentioned on the programme last night, as you know, I spent a lot of time in Lebanon. It's a very complex political, military situation. He's talking to the Lebanese people, he's talking to the Lebanese politicians. It is not that easy to extract yourself from a situation where Hezbollah controls the military in the south. It is a state within a state. And of course, it is elected to the parliament. I mean, it is part of the governing structure of the country.
Yeah, 100%. And when you look at the capability that Hezbollah has, based on the fact that it's been supported by Iran and the Syrian army, it's almost an impossible ask to look at the Lebanese people to sort of, try and deal with this, and the potential catastrophic outcomes of what that means for South Lebanon, the infrastructure, and more importantly, the potential collateral when it comes to civilians is absolutely huge. If we can go slide, please. What we can see there is an extremely large bomb being dropped on Gaza City. Now, what the IDF do have is a capability like the GBU-39, which is a much, much smaller precision-guided munition. And the IDF also have the skill set to conduct the collateral damage estimate. They can look at pattern of life with drones to understand what collateral lies within that. But most importantly, the rules of engagement. Now, for example, if we look at the slide on the left, you can see the apartment building just on the right there. There is the capability, and I know this from experience, having been involved in that precision targeting process. If there were two snipers, for example, on the third floor of that building, there is the capability to put a much, much smaller precision-guided munition onto that target with what's called a steel penetrator. The steel penetrator would allow the bomb to go through the first 20 floors. You put a delayed fuse on it, and then it just takes out the complete second floor and leaves the apartment.
We saw that in Iraq. I mean, when I was in Iraq, they were dropping missiles through the roofs of some of the palaces and taking out different floors.
Yeah.
So there is that capability, and it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, you saw the little holes in the roof, and that's where the bomb came through.
This is a question that has puzzled me for the last few weeks, and we'll talk about Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza in a second. But if you collapse buildings on top of tunnels, on top of underground control facilities, how complex does it then become in pinning down the enemy?
Yeah, I mean, this is the nub of the question. I mean, the IDF have released graphics showing very complex underground tunnel systems inside Gaza And their point of releasing that graphic was they basically destroyed them through weaponry. But what's really interesting, if we can go slide, please, this is video footage of a recent tunnel. This one is in South Lebanon, and it actually goes all the way through 10 meters inside Israel. And the Radwan forces, which are the Hezbollah special forces, effectively have been using this to store anti-tank missiles, IEDs, any form of capability.
So kit bags there.
Yeah, kit bags. I mean, as you go all the way through, not only is there equipment in there, but you can see from the footage that the tunnel is very well made. It's been conducted over a long period of time with many reinforcements, which is, meant for use over a long period of time. So, with this capability inside Lebanon, yes, the IDF have targeted many of the tunnel systems inside Gaza, but there are a significant amount of tunnel systems that the IDF don't know about inside Lebanon. And if the IDF take the same approach, which is to bomb those tunnels, to render them useless, if they take that approach in South Lebanon, slide, we can just go to the damage map, then what we can see on there is the current situation inside South Lebanon and Lebanon, which are Israeli strikes inside the
1,100 in 10 days,
which is, this is the boiling frog syndrome. It's what has taken place in Gaza, and it's happening, and no one's sort of standing up to it. But if you imagine what that map is going to look like, if the IDF then take the approach that whatever tunnel systems they find inside South Lebanon, they're going to put bombs on. That map is going to become significantly more catastrophic as the days and weeks go on.
Well, I mean, we're talking there about the IDF getting into another quagmire, but there is already evidence of that, as we discussed plenty in Gaza. They are, as I mentioned, back in the Jabalia refugee camp, which is north of Gaza City. That is one of the first places they went to when the war started. They're back there for the fourth time. Yeah.
I think that's significant when it comes to the ability for the IDF to fight an enemy in an urban environment that has a significant amount of civilians. It's 2 million inside Gaza. If we can just go slide, please. What we're going to see here is effectively the map of Jabalia and of Gaza, and you can see in the north where the refugee camp is that you just alluded to where Hamas have become sort of resurgent again. You've got the Nezrim line there, which is the line that you can see in between where it says Gaza and Jabalia. And that effectively is a line that's been set up by the IDF, which is observational posts. So the IDF are monitoring who comes into northern Gaza and who goes out of northern Gaza. And you've got a Hamas resurgence in Jabalia, even though the IDF has set the line up.
But I mean, this is a control zone. I mean, Lebanon is very, very different to that. Gaza, as you say, there's a control line across it. So what? Are there tunnels going underneath that? Are there tunnels they've not got to in the north? We know it's extensive, the tunnel map.
It is. I think the tunneling system in South Lebanon is important. The most key point here, before we sign off, is effectively the IDF have one contained enemy inside Gaza. If we look at what I think is the most likely co of Iran in terms of ground forces, proxy forces inside South Lebanon, Popular Mobilization Forces Iraq, you've got the Syrian army in Syria, you've got the IRGC, you've got the Houthis, if all of a sudden there's a lot of movement of those militant groups into South Lebanon, then the IDF have multiple enemies, multiple fronts that aren't contained, because obviously it can disappear out to the north and through Syria. That's where it becomes a problem. And if we put a slide up, please, I think it's just the battle damage map again. Iran's longer term most dangerous COA is putting those proxies back in again, but it's also Hezbollah's most dangerous COA, and it's also the IDF's most dangerous COA.
Fascinating. Mikey, really good. Takes us around the whole Middle East and the situation we're facing at the moment. We will do this the same time next week, Mikey. Thank you for that. Thank you for watching.